The first time I saw the ghost, she was standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with hollow eyes. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, and her translucent hands reached toward me, as if begging for something I could not understand. I was frozen, unable to scream, unable to move. And just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone, dissolving into the air like mist. I told myself it was a dream, just another nightmare in a long line of sleepless nights. But the next night she returned. Her presence lingered in the house long after the sun rose. The air was heavy, charged with something unseen, yet deeply felt. The old house, passed down through generations in my family, had always had a reputation for strange occurrences, whispers in the dark, doors creaking open on their own, shadows shifting where they shouldn't. I never believed the stories, not until now. Determined to uncover the truth, I began digging into the house's past. I scoured old family records, newspaper clippings, and anything that might explain the apparition, haunting my nights. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how little I knew about the place I called home. There was a name that kept surfacing: Margaret Holloway, a distant relative, long forgotten, whose story was barely a whisper in our family's history. She had lived here over a century ago, a woman shrouded in mystery. The few accounts I could find spoke of her tragic demise. An accident, they said, a fall from the grand staircase. But the deeper I looked, the more inconsistencies I found. Some accounts hinted at something more sinister. Some even suggested she had been murdered. I became obsessed. The nights were no longer my own, and neither were my thoughts. Every evening, Margaret would appear, growing more desperate with each visit. Her silent pleas were no longer just terrifying, they were heartbreaking. She wanted something from me, but what? Then I found it. A letter hidden in the hollow of an old oak dresser in the attic. The ink had faded, the paper brittle with age, but the words still screamed their truth. They want me dead. If something happens to me, know that it was not an accident. My blood ran cold. Margaret had been murdered, and her killer had gotten away with it. I spent the next days in a haze trying to piece together the clues. Who had done it? Why had no one spoken up? The house held its secrets well, but the ghost of Margaret Holloway was done being silent. The final night, she came to me differently, no longer a specter of terror, but a soul burdened with sorrow. She reached out once more, and this time, I didn't flinch. I whispered the name I had uncovered, the truth that had been buried for so long. Her hollow eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before: relief. And then she was gone. The house still creaks at night. The whispers haven't completely faded. But Margaret no longer lingers at the foot of my bed, and for the first time in a long time, I sleep without fear. Some ghosts just want to be heard, and some secrets refuse to stay buried forever. But that was not the end. A week after Margaret's final visit, I began to feel it, an unease creeping back into the walls of the house. Objects would shift ever so slightly when I wasn't looking. The scent of lilacs, Margaret's favorite perfume according to an old journal, would suddenly fill the air. It was as if she was still here, lingering, watching. Then came the dreams, vivid, too real to be mere illusions. In them, Margaret stood at the edge of a forest I had never seen before. She pointed toward something hidden in the shadows. Her expression filled with both urgency and sorrow. I would wake with my heart pounding, the image seared into my mind. I had to follow the clues. After days of research, I stumbled upon an old land registry that mentioned a secluded patch of woods several miles away. land once owned by our family, but long since abandoned. The moment I saw the name on the document, I knew it was the place from my dreams. I drove there at dawn, the mist still clinging to the trees. The silence was thick, pressing against my ears. I wandered through the woods, guided only by instinct, and the faint whispers I couldn't shake from my mind. Then I found it, a shallow, unmarked grave beneath a gnarled oak tree. The earth, disturbed just enough to suggest something had been hidden for decades. With trembling hands, I began to dig. The deeper I went, the more the truth surfaced, both in the dirt and in my mind. And then my fingers scraped against something hard. A box. Old, rusted, but still intact. I pried it open, breathless with anticipation. Inside lay a bundle of papers, letters, exchanged between Margaret and a man whose name I recognized from my research. He had been her confidant, her secret lover, and in those letters she had confessed her fears, her suspicions that someone close to her wanted her gone. The final letter, dated mere days before her death, ended with a chilling plea. If anything happens to me, know that I was right. My blood ran cold. Margaret had known, and now so did I. But there was more, a second, smaller note, barely legible. It wasn't from Margaret. It was from the killer. You were never supposed to know. Stay away. A chill ran down my spine. Someone else had known about this grave. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my room felt darker, heavier. The house no longer felt like mine. The scent of lilacs turned from comforting to suffocating. Then the whispers started again. But this time, they weren't Margaret's. A new presence had awakened, one filled with rage, one that didn't want the past unearthed. And as I lay, there too afraid to close my eyes, I knew the horror was far from over. The past had been disturbed, and now something else had been set free. I never believed in ghosts, not really. Sure, I'd heard stories, who hasn't? But they were just that, stories. That is, until the night I returned to Blackwood Manor. The house had been in my family for generations, standing alone at the end of a winding, overgrown path. It had been abandoned for years after my uncle, the last resident, passed away. His death had been ruled an accident, though the details were vague. A fall down the stairs, they said. But something never sat right with me. Maybe that's why. When I inherited the house, I felt drawn to it, compelled to uncover its secrets. From the moment I stepped inside, the house felt aware. The air was thick with dust and silence, but beneath it was something else, a presence. I shook off the feeling and set about exploring. The grand staircase loomed ahead, its wooden steps creaking under my weight. At the top, a long hallway stretched into darkness. I checked the rooms one by one, finding only relics of a past life. Furniture draped in white sheets, forgotten books lining the shelves, an old piano sitting in the parlor, untouched and out of tune. Then I reached my uncle's study. The door was locked, but the key, as if expecting me, sat on a nearby table. I turned it in the lock and the door swung open with an eerie ease. The study was exactly as he'd left it. Papers were scattered across the desk. An old clock ticked softly on the wall, and the scent of leather and aged paper filled the air. But what caught my attention was a notebook, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. It watches. It waits. It whispers my name. A chill ran down my spine. The entries became more erratic, filled with desperate warnings. The house is alive. It sees me. It knows. The last page was smeared, the ink almost unreadable, but one word stood out, scrawled over and over. Run. A sudden noise made me jump. A whisper, soft, almost inaudible. My name. I spun around. Nothing. The room felt colder. The walls seemed closer. I backed out and shut the door, my heart pounding. That night, I barely slept. The house creaked, and my breath caught. It was him, my uncle, or what was left of him. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and stretched too tight over his bones. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Then, slowly, he raised a skeletal hand and pointed toward the door. The moment I moved, he vanished. I didn't know what compelled me to follow his gesture, but I did. The hallway was darker than before, the air thick with something unseen. As I reached the staircase, a feeling of dread gripped me. I knew, deep in my bones, that something terrible had happened here. Then, a whisper. Look down. I obeyed. And I saw it. The stairs, those old, creaky stairs. They were wrong. Too smooth in places, like they had been worn down by something more than footsteps. The wood near the base was stained, darker than the rest. A memory stirred, unbidden. My uncle's fall. The accident. But it hadn't been an accident, had it? Another whisper, closer this time. Underneath. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hands against the wood. A loose board shifted under my touch. With trembling fingers, I pried it up. Beneath it lay something wrapped in cloth, something small, something old. I unwrapped it and my stomach lurched. A diary, not my uncle's, someone else's. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but I could still make out the words. He found me. He knows what I did. I have to stop him before he tells. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It was my uncle's. I flipped to the last entry, my hand shaking. I hear him at night, scratching, whispering. I thought I got rid of him, but he won't leave. He wants me to pay. I recoiled. The air around me thickened, pressing in on all sides. The walls groaned, the house trembling, as if waking from a long sleep. And then, a final whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside my own head. Not an accident, not an accident, not an accident. The house knew. It had always known. My uncle didn't just fall. He was pushed, and he had done the same to someone. Before him, I stumbled back, my mind racing. The house wasn't haunted by my uncle's ghost. No, the presence here was much older. Something that had been waiting, watching, feeding, and now it had me. The last thing I remember was the floor rushing toward me, the sickening snap of wood beneath my feet, a scream, my own. Then silence. When I woke, I was standing at the foot of the staircase, looking up, and at the top, staring down at me, was someone new, someone familiar. Me. I reached out, but my hands weren't solid. I wasn't solid. The realization hit like a thunderclap. I was dead. The house had taken me, just like it had taken my uncle, just like it had taken the ones before us. And as I stood there watching my own lifeless body crumpled at the base of the stairs, I understood the final cruel twist. The house didn't just kill, it replaced. And now I was its new voice, its new keeper, its new ghost, and I would wait for the next one to come home. The first time I saw her, I thought I was losing my mind. It was just a fleeting moment, something off about the mirror in my bedroom. I was brushing my hair when I noticed it. My reflection wasn't moving right. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a split second, I could swear she was watching me. Then she moved, not a trick of the light, not my imagination. My reflection, my perfect copy, tilted her head in a way I hadn't. The hair on my arms rose, and I scrambled away from the mirror, my heart pounding. But when I dared to look again, everything was normal. Just me, wide-eyed and pale, staring. At my own terror, I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. Nothing more, but that was only the beginning. The next time it happened, it was worse. I was getting ready for bed, yawning as I turned away from the mirror, but something made me glance back. She was still looking at me. I was facing away, but my reflection wasn't. She stood there watching with a hollow smile that didn't belong to me. I screamed. I threw the closest thing I could find, a perfume bottle, straight at the mirror. It shattered, glass raining onto the floor. The moment the mirror broke, the air in the room shifted like something had been released. The silence that followed felt heavier, suffocating. I spent that night on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, every light in the house blazing. I wanted to believe that breaking the mirror had ended it. That I was free, I wasn't. It got worse after that. Reflections became my worst enemy. I'd catch glimpses of her in store windows, watching me from behind glass surfaces, always just a second too long before she disappeared. I stopped looking. In mirrors altogether, brushing my teeth in the dark, avoiding anything with a reflection. But it didn't help. She found other ways. One night, I turned on my phone's front camera by accident, and there she was, not mimicking me, just standing there, grinning, as if she knew something I didn't. I threw the phone across the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what was happening. Desperation led me to research folklore, superstitions, anything that could explain what was happening. Doppelgangers, mirror spirits, entities that could mimic people, waiting for the right moment to step through. One legend stood out. Reflections are doors, and sometimes something on the other side wants to switch places. My stomach twisted. Had I already let her in? Had breaking the mirror only weakened the barrier? The thought made me physically ill. I had to end this before she did. I covered every reflective surface in my home, every mirror, every window, even my phone screen, but it didn't matter. That night I woke up to whispers, soft, insistent, calling my name. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the blankets over my head. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. Then, the sound of shattering glass. I bolted upright. The bedroom mirror, covered, untouched for days, was in pieces on the floor. But what made my blood run cold was the woman standing in the middle of the shards. She wasn't in the mirror anymore. She was in my room. And she looked exactly like me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My breath hitched as she took a step forward, the crunch of glass beneath her bare feet. The only sound in the room, she smiled, the same smile I had seen in the mirror all those times. "You should have let me in sooner," she whispered, her voice identical to mine. "It's so much nicer on this side." I stumbled back, hitting the wall. My body felt numb, my mind scrambling for an escape. But she only tilted her head, as if amused. "It's okay," she cooed. "It'll be over soon." She lunged. The pain was cold, not sharp, not fiery, just cold, like slipping into an icy lake. My vision blurred, my body frozen, unable to fight, and then I was falling, not onto the floor, not onto the glass. I was falling through the mirror. I woke up gasping, my hands hitting something smooth beneath me. Glass. I scrambled up and realized I was in my room. But something was wrong. The air felt thinner, hazy, and then I saw her, standing in my place. On the other side of the broken mirror, me, but not me. She smirked and tilted her head just like before. "Told you," she said. I pounded on the glass. "Let me out," her smile widened. "I just got here. Why would I leave?" I screamed. The glass didn't break this time. It didn't even crack, because I was on the wrong side now. I watched as she stretched, running a hand through her hair. My hair. Then, humming softly, she turned and walked away, leaving me trapped in the reflection. I slammed my fists against the mirror over and over, but it was useless. My body felt like air, my voice swallowed by the void. And then I saw the worst part. On the dresser beside my bed was a brand new mirror, and in it my reflection was already starting to fade.